Okay, I think we can start again, and it's the great opportunity. Like we planned a bit on like a plane. The first we were very high. Now in the last panel we went a little lower, and now we really go deep into something because we will have a discussion on the new collection display here in Düsseldorf right now, and it's great to have the creator of the display here, Vivian Trommer, discussing with Georg Imdahl, and let me just briefly introduce both of them. Vivian Trommer has created the display here, the new display here in Düsseldorf. She's head of collections at the Kunstsammlung Nordrhein-Westphalia, K20. Most recently, she oversaw the collection relaunch and has also curated major shows here during the last years, Jenny Holzer 23 or Shifting Dialogues Photography from the Walter Collection 2022 at K21. Georg Imdahl is an art critic and professor at the Academy of Fine Arts in Münster since 2011, and he regularly contributes with critiques to the German FAZ. He studied philosophy, modern history, and political science in Bochum and had a doctorate from the University of Witten-Herdecke. Thank you very much for being here today, and thank you much, you, Vivian, for let us have an insight in what you've done with the collection.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me here for this invitation, Rethinking the Museum. Why rethinking the museum? We had a lot of arguments already. I think one of the reasons of rethinking the museum in Düsseldorf lies in the person of the founding director too, I have the impression. Let me share some brief memories. It was in the late 1980s when, short before his retirement, I experienced Werner Schmalenbach at some press meetings for exhibitions, and later had some talks with him at his invitation. As we heard already, the Kunstsammlung has always been a very patchy, very small collection. Schmalenbach only bought about 200 works in over 30 years, which is not much. Schmalenbach was an enthusiast for individual works and their extraordinary quality, and he was a style aristocrat, you can say, with the necessary self-confidence, not to say with a portion of arrogance. He looked down from the Parnasse to an art world that produces art over art, art for which, by his own admission, he had sympathies, but he didn't want to see much of this in museums. We already mentioned that he exclusively collected Western art, and he didn't have the eye for quality for female artists. We said this already. But as I mentioned, he always knew exactly which particular work, which particular painting he wanted, this or nothing else. And this is in our first PowerPoint folie, two works from Lichtenstein and Pollock. For him, Pollock, the number 32, it was the only painting he wanted to get, and he did get it. And I can confirm it, that I would truly say too, it's the best Pollock. Yeah? And I always thought it's great that the best Pollock is in Düsseldorf. And the same is with the big painting number 6 from Roy Lichtenstein. He wanted particular this one brush stroke, and in this case I would say too, it's really a great work. Schmalenbach consistently determined quality from his own mindset. He said it's a question of subjectivity, and of course, you can be criticized for this, but you have to make your own choice. Another mantra of him was he was not interested in trends and tendencies, as he wrote, but in individual pictures. And he never wanted to buy immediately or, as he called it, up front. A very special feature of the museum's administration when he began and for a long time was the fact that the board consisted only of his person, and this chairman was identical to the director. And this unified function, he was able to put together the 3-person commission for the purchase himself. And he frankly said, I needed yes men, and I got them. Schmalenbach was accused of prestige purchases. And he said, yes, a museum must buy an elite of works. He always took his individual eye as the yardstick. To come to an end, and here is another example how he collected. We have 2 works from Max Ernst, perhaps the next one. Well, there was a huge show about surrealism more than 20 years ago. I think it was in 2002, curated by Werner Spies. It came from Paris to Düsseldorf. And in a short article to draw attention to the second station of the exhibition, I remarked in the FAZ, to see the reunification of Max Ernst wall paintings for the home of Paul Éluard, the poet's home, is bittersweet for the art collection of the Kunstsammlung, because after their rediscovery in the late 1960s, the paintings had been scattered in all directions. The large natural history, this is on the right side, this went to Tehran, while only the first clear word left came to Düsseldorf. And I concluded, what a pity for the Kunstsammlung. And then Werner Schmalenbach wrote a letter to me and said, no, you are wrong. I could have bought both of them, but only one of them I was convinced of, so I didn't purchase the other. And I thought, wow, he was sure about what he wanted and what he didn't want. Okay, now question to you, Vivian. If you speak of the DNA, we heard a lot of the DNA already, but I noted this question too. If you speak of the DNA of K20 and 21, which I tried to outline a little bit from Schmalenbach's perspective, there's not much left of his DNA today, or is there? And what would you say is worth to keep from Schmalenbach's mindset?
Thank you for the introduction and then the question. I think it was a real challenge for us to think the collection through in that sense. So we really wanted to keep the exceptionality and the brilliance of this collection and not dilute it, but rather broaden it and expand on it progressively and intelligently. And this was the way Susanne started collecting when she started to head the museum, and then we continued in that way. So I would say we agree with Schmalenbach in many ways and on many points, but we disagree on others, which is that for us, the collection today is not just an archive of paintings, of artworks, but of knowledge and of all the curatorial practices that have been inscribed in the past decades into the museum. So we no longer see this place as a temple of final truth, or we earlier called it an elitist space, but for us it's a space of empathy and exchange where we can really see or open up a space for our audiences to look at art as an opportunity to reflect, to question, and to learn from one another. And I think we hope we made this possible through the presentation we did.
What were the main principles of your discussion when, yes, reinstalling?
A few things were mentioned already. So we started first to think about chronology and really wanted to break with that. A linear progress where an avant-garde follows another. This was the way the presentation, or the collection was presented for a very long time. We rather thought of a timeless now where past, the present, and the future coexist, and where we can look at the connections between the artworks across times. So we hope we made it more contemporary to really make it speak about our time and to shift, to let it breathe and respond to the current global crises. And another important issue for us was to learn from artists. So Susanne mentioned that we worked together with Anis Reimann, the local living artist Peter Uecker and Anis Reimann. But we also worked with Noemi Weber, who's here tonight with us, today. And we were reading the texts and essays by Etel Adnan, Rashid Areen, Grada Kilomba, and that really influenced how we would think of art history as a narrative. And a way we made it then visible in the collection is that we didn't only include the text that we wrote, but also quotes by the artist that you maybe can see in a picture like this. And then another way that was important for us to narrate the collection is that we broadened it through acquisitions, but then the major question was how to actually integrate new acquisitions into this very Western canonical collection. And we wanted to also broaden the ways we're looking at art. So each of the 25 chapters is a story, is a narrative, from a very different curatorial approach. They range from feminist to decolonial, some are playful, others are more self-reflexive. In other chapters we speak about our own museum history. So we wanted it to be very diverse and open up and not have just one way of interpreting and presenting the works of the collection.
So I think there is no doubt that there is a necessity to rethink and overthink and to develop the collection. But for me, it's also a question of how you do it and how does it look in the museum. And does a museum have to look like an archive? This is a question I would like to raise. If I have one example is you made a fabulous acquisition in my mind. Alice Neel, The Great Society from 1965. I think it was an expensive acquisition, but why is it a great exhibition? In my mind, it's a great painting, and it's an early painting. It's a painting that lets us think of other painters like Nicole Eisenman or something like her. But the question is, how is it presented? I didn't really understand how you can present such an acquisition in such an ephemeral way, and it's just nearly hidden, and the star of this wall is your blue, your colored blue explanation, and I saw this several times in the exhibition or in the collection, that your own statement is very dominant, and the artworks are the artworks. What do you say to this?
Okay, let's see. Thank you for that criticality too. So when we arranged the spaces and installed each gallery, what we were aiming for is to actually put the new acquisitions and works from the depot that have been marginalized for a very long time, to place them on the central walls in the galleries. to allow them to be center stage so that it would allow us as a museum to re-narrate art history through their eyes and through their lenses. But it might be, also because the galleries are shaped kind of very proportionally, maybe we don't have the same impression of what the central wall would be.
Okay. But to be honest, this for me really looks like an archive. And I make a difference between an archive and a museum.
Understand. Yeah.
And I could quote, but no, it's not necessary to quote Schmalenbach again. And I'm not the advocate of Schmalenbach here, but he says art history belongs between two. It belongs into a book, and art belongs into the museum.
Yeah.
And I have sometimes the impression that art could be presented more forceful for the artworks themselves.
Understand. Wait, I wanted. So this particular gallery is about what is the political power of art? And we wanted to show artworks that were made in New York in the 60s and the political dimension they had. Because previously the collection was presented in a very apolitical way. As you just mentioned, the work could shine and breathe and speak their own histories, but we wanted to add some context to help our audiences that are not that well educated on art history to find an access point to look at art in different ways. So it's more an offer than a statement, and we rather wanted to ask questions than give answers. And then you said something about the archive. Maybe we should expand on that as well, if you want to raise the question again.
Well, should the museum look like an archive? Yes, that's the question.
Yeah. Absolutely not, and I think we both agree on that, because I think a museum is a space first, and it's our task and duty to create that space together with artists, scholars, and experts, where actually art can be experienced and we can learn through art, looking at our world in different ways, from positions of difference, from experiences from near and far, just to make different viewpoints visible.
Okay, let me mention an example which I liked very much, not only because I'm in fact a fan of Wiebke Siem, but this really works for me, because yes, I think here the artworks really speak for themselves. Whose idea was it?
I think you asked it because we said we collaborated with artists a lot and learned from them. And in that case, it's actually more of a curatorial decision. And maybe also a problem behind it I would like to share is that in Susanne's presentation, you saw the other side of the room. So this gallery is dedicated to surrealism and how it expanded globally across decades. So it started in 1924, and the first movement in Paris closed or separated in 1928 already. But from there on, it had different networks all over the world, in North Africa, Latin America, and then in Asia. So we included the 3 works by the surrealist artists from the group Art et Liberté, Fouad Kamel, Maillot, and Hassan El-Temissani into this gallery and put them center stage. So we reduced the works by canonical Western artists from this period. But then we were, when we did research on how to expand the collection, we were desperately looking for a surrealist woman painter. And we were looking at the works of Dorothea Tanning, Remedios Varo, and Kay Sage. But they all were very expensive, and we couldn't acquire them easily. So we didn't have a work from a time, from early surrealism, by a female artist to be included in that gallery. And when we looked through what's in the collection, we encountered Wiebke Siem. And she's born in 1954 in Kiel. She lives in Berlin, and she has this very installation artist practice that speaks about gender roles and in a very humorous way. So this work of hers is actually an exception in how she usually works. And we thought it flirts with the idea of surrealism, so it would be a nice addition to the galleries. But we wouldn't say she's a surrealist artist. No. But then for us, the whole presentation is not about, and it was said earlier, it's not about the binary concepts. So for us, there's no inclusion into surrealism and no surrealism. There is no canon or periphery. It is rather an interwoven narrative where different styles and movements and achievements by artists are interconnected and they speak to one another. And I think this is also the beautiful thing a museum or a collection gallery can make visible, rather than a book or an archive, where you actually can try out things and make artworks connect with one another.
What you told about that you wanted to buy a tanning work of art and didn't get it because it's too expensive. But I think you agree that if you want to globalize the collection, the best way would be to globalize it with artworks which stem from the same period where they are presented then. Do you agree to this, that this kind of synchronicity should be kept, is a good thing? I would say it would be great. So I looked into the catalog of the show that had been mentioned here already from Okui and Wesor, the short century, which impressed me very, very much when I saw it in 2001 in Munich. And I thought, wouldn't it be an option to make a research which quality paintings, however you want to define it, are on the market for your collection? I could name some names from them, but perhaps it's not so important who in Wesor. But aren't there enough pieces that you could acquire from the same period, so that you see not only how do artists today react, but how they already reacted in the 40s, 50s?
Two thoughts. This is expanding the collection retrospectively. It's actually a practice that Schmalenbach also implied, because the museum started in 1961, and then he built up a collection of early modernism retrospectively. And we try to continue, but it's very difficult to find works on the market that are equally highly qualitative enough, or as the works that are already in the collection. So it takes time, and it's a process. And we hope that we can continue with the acquisition budget that we have to keep on broadening the collection.
Okay, ich gucke auf die Uhr. I think that's it. Yeah. Thank you.